Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today is to give you a shortcut, really, to understanding one of the most systematic, long-term tools of statecraft ever devised.
It's a methodology that leverages something as, seemingly soft as cultural beliefs.
Right, but uses them to conquer territory, to assimilate entire populations, and to generate a kind of power that's far more enduring than any standing army.
Absolutely. And we're unpacking a concept so pervasive, so fundamental to history, that it, really required its own name, Mythostrategy.
Mythostrategy, okay. So to understand why we even need a term like this, we have to start with a really stark contrast our sources lay out for us.
We do. We're looking at this centuries-long process of assimilation in China, and we're focusing particularly on the Western regions.
Let's start with the Uyghur people, because their story, their current status, it's just deeply troubling, and it really sets the stage.
It really does. You have to go back maybe a century or so. In the 1930s in Turkey, the term Uyghurluk was used.
And what did that mean exactly?
It was basically a synonym for civilization, for refinement, for historical achievement. It was a huge cultural compliment.
So to say someone had Uyghurluk was like saying they were cultured, they were civilized.
Exactly. It affirmed their high level of cultural attainment, their historical standing. The concept was, completely inseparable from the idea of civilization itself.
A society that was recognized globally for having built and created and maintained civilization. That's a powerful foundational identity.
It is. And then you fast forward to today, you look at their status now.
It's a complete reversal.
A complete reversal. They are arguably one of the most repressed and marginalized groups on the planet, deprived of fundamental human rights on a massive scale.
That kind of descent from being a symbol of civilization to a target of state repression, that doesn't happen by accident.
No. It's to just something deeper, a systematic, centuries-long process at work.
So we're not just talking about, a recent political disagreement.
Not at all. We are attributing this outcome to something that's really built into the DNA of historical statecraft. The sources describe it as a pattern of endless deceit, cunning, and trickery.
And it wasn't just applied to the Uyghurs.
No, to other ethnic groups as well, all within China's massive historical footprint. And that systematic application, it needs a definition.
Which brings us back to mythostrategy.
Right. It brings us to the central concept the researcher developed after studying all these historical patterns, especially Chinese mythology. Mythostrategy, or Mitostratejy.
So it's a concept specifically formulated to explain how states convert these shared cultural stories
into tangible political, territorial, and assimilation gains.
And we should really stress this. This is a new intellectual tool designed to explain a very, very old practice.
It is. It's an analytical framework that the researcher just didn't find anywhere in the existing literature.
So our mission, then, is to break down this powerful and, frankly, pretty unsettling concept.
We'll approach this by first deconstructing the theoretical building blocks. We need to understand myth, the power of myth, and strategy.
Before we can put them all together.
Exactly. Then we'll move into 3 really powerful case studies from Chinese history and mythology. Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor. Wangwu. And then a surprisingly modern one involving Sun Wukong, the Monkey King.
And by the end of this, you'll have a new lens to see how culture really dictates control.
That's the goal.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the most essential ingredient here, the myth itself.
Right. So when we talk about myth in the context of mythostrategy, we have to throw out any idea of it just being simple fiction.
It's not a fairy tale.
It is not a fairy tale. The sources define myths as stories that are fundamentally about the actions of gods or divine beings or these primordial ancestors.
And that's the key, isn't it? The divine origin.
It's everything. Because the actions originate with the divine, the stories are accepted by the community as both real and sacred.
That distinction, real and sacred, that's what gives them their immense power in the real world.
It means the narrative isn't just something you believe in. It's a non-negotiable truth that underpins your entire reality.
And that sacred quality, what does that do?
Well, it generates what we can call the prototype effect. The divine actions in these myths, how the gods acted, what the first ancestors did, they established the archetypes.
The model behaviors.
The unchallengeable model behaviors for all meaningful human actions within that culture.
So the myth is like the original blueprint for society. If the gods built temples, we build churches or mosques.
Precisely. The standard example the source gives is marriage. I mean, why do people commit to a social structure like that?
Because the first ones did. Adam and Eve,
or other foundational ancestors, depending on the culture.
Exactly.
Their action establishes the standard practice. This is how mythology imposes order on human society.
And if you step outside that order, if you deviate from the prototype,
the consequences aren't just, personal, they're social. It becomes this powerful moral compulsion.
It's not a choice anymore.
It's a moral obligation. Doing what the ancestors and gods did is the right thing to do. And failure to conform, the source uses the example of choosing not to marry, it results in great pressure and sanction from the community.
So the community itself becomes the enforcement mechanism for the myth.
It does. And that shared moral compulsion, which is rooted in this deep spiritual truth, it generates a collective force. That force is the engine of mythostrategy.
This unique spiritual force.
That's the term. This collective, deeply internalized acceptance of the mythical story creates an immense power that can then be directed.
And to really understand the scale of this power, the researcher brings in a pretty heavy hitter.
He does, the renowned Chinese sociologist Fei Xiaotong.
And what did Fei Xiaotong say about this, about the unifying role of myths?
He stated that myths, because they work directly on the human heart, on the human soul, they possess a unique spiritual power.
Okay.
And this is the kicker. A spiritual power that is, in fact, stronger than battalions.
Stronger than battalions. That is a staggering claim.
It is.
I mean, you think about modern states pouring trillions into military hardware, and here's the assertion that a directed, collective spiritual consciousness is a superior force.
It suggests that if you can successfully control the origin story, the myth, you gain a level of control over the moral compass and the loyalty of a population that no army can ever truly match in the long term.
And that power. That's the first ingredient for strategy.
That is the necessary first component.
Okay, so before we combine these ideas, let's just quickly nail down the second half of our term, strategy. It's a word we hear all the time, but what's the rigorous definition we're using here?
At its simplest, strategy is the chosen path to achieve a predetermined objective. It started mostly in the military field.
Right, the art of using armies to achieve a political goal.
But today, you're right, it's everywhere. Commerce, personal finance. Fundamentally, it's about application.
Applying an idea to daily life?
Correct. But for mythostrategy, we need to go a little deeper than that general definition. We need to look at the structural formula experts use.
This is where we break it down into the essential ingredients. The sources give us a very precise three-part equation.
The formula is strategy, power plus concept plus goal.
Power, concept, and goal.
And if any one of those three elements is missing, the action isn't a complete strategy. It's just, random effort or maybe an unrealized ambition.
Okay, let's use an analogy. Let's say my goal is to run a marathon. That's the objective.
Right. The power in that scenario is your raw resource.
Yeah.
It's your current physical fitness, your endurance, your energy, the time you have to train.
And the concept.
The concept is the methodical plan for applying that power. It's the specific training schedule, the pacing plan, the nutrition strategy you'll follow. So strategy is organizing your physical power using a structured concept to achieve the goal of finishing that race.
Got it. So in the context of mythostrategy, the power isn't physical force.
No. Is that unique spiritual power of myth we just talked about, that moral compulsion, that collective consciousness.
That's the raw energy.
That immense shared energy is the power. The concept is the strategic re-engineering of the myth itself, taking Huangdi and placing him on Kunlun Mountain. And the goal is the political objective, like assimilation or territorial control.
Oh, it's a framework for organizing spiritual power to reach a defined political objective.
That's the core insight. It's how cultural stories get weaponized.
Okay, so now we can finally fuse the two concepts. We take that unique spiritual power generated by a shared myth.
And we apply the structural concept of directed strategy to it.
Which gives us our definition.
And the conceptual definition is this. Mythostrategy is the political and strategic use of myths, mythological ancestral heroes, or foundational figures. It's the intentional leverage of that shared history and cultural memory to achieve predetermined political outcomes.
And the actionable definition, the how-to guide, so to speak.
It's defined as the act and method of uniting, directing, and transforming different cultures and societies and achieving economic gain by using those specific myths, ancestors, and heroes.
And the research identifies 4 key applications, right? 4 reasons why this strategy is so incredibly potent.
Yes. First, it legitimizes religious and political systems. You can't really challenge the emperor if his right to rule is based on the divine actions of the very first ancestor.
His rule is just a continuation of the prototype.
Exactly. Two, it's an unparalleled tool to bring together different cultures and societies. You could just override complex ethnic, linguistic, or historical differences by asserting a common origin story.
You just declare everyone brothers and sisters under one ancestor.
You do. And the final two applications show the long-term, almost irreversible consequences.
Those are?
Three, it allows the dominant group to transform the target cultures and societies. By inserting a new ancestor or subtly changing an existing myth, you start to alter the cultural identity and self-perception of the group you're targeting.
And four, that transformation almost always leads to economic benefit.
Always. Primarily through making territorial claims legitimate, getting access to resources, and controlling trade routes.
So it's a full-spectrum dominance tool. You get legitimacy, unity, transformation, and profit.
And the sources also clarify how it's deployed differently depending on the target.
Internal versus external use.
Right. Internally, the main function is to convert the shared historical memory of the majority, what they already believe, into immediate political power. It legitimizes the existing ruling system.
And externally, that's when it's aimed at minorities or neighboring regions like the Western Territory.
Externally, it's used aggressively to direct and transform those target cultures. In other words, assimilation. And crucially, to secure those vital economic interests that are so often tied to territorial claims.
That's a crucial distinction. Okay, but this concept sounds very close to strategies involving religion. We need to be clear on the difference.
Yes, the researcher brings up the work of Professor Dr. Nadip Masit, who developed the concept of theostrategy, or religious strategy. The sources call them almost twins.
It's a good analogy. So what's the key difference?
The distinction is clear, and it's all about the source material you're leveraging. Theostrategy focuses specifically on the political strategic use of organized religion.
So its tools would be things like standardized religious texts, formal institutions, clerics, established sects.
That's it. If we were looking at Turkic societies, theostrategy would involve using the established structures of Islam, leveraging the authority of the Quran or the Prophet to achieve a political end.
Okay, so what about mythostrategy in that same context?
Mythostrategy is focused on something more ancient, something that often predates formal religion. It focuses on myths and the shared cultural memory built around these elemental mythological ancestors and heroes.
So for the Turkic people, it wouldn't be about the Quran.
No, it would be about harnessing ancient non-religious beliefs. For example, the foundational stories about Oguz Ata, or tracing a lineage back to the mythical Afravyap, or using the potent symbolism of the Bozkurt, the gray wolf.
So these figures and symbols operate outside the formal structures of religion.
Exactly. Yeah. They operate purely within the realm of shared cultural consciousness. The difference, the ancestral story versus the religious doctrine, that's the defining factor.
That grounding is absolutely necessary. Okay, we have the theory down. Let's see this systematic process in action, starting with the foundational ancestor figure.
Let's start with Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor.
Our sources identify him as the quintessential case study of mythostrategy. He is promoted universally as the first ancestor of the Chinese.
He is the absolute anchor. By establishing him as the beginning, as the cornerstone of Chinese national identity and culture, you create this singular unifying point of origin for all the peoples within that massive geographical sphere.
And this lineage is cemented through one of the most powerful, recognizable cultural symbols in the entire world, the dragon.
That's right. Huangdi is identified with the dragon, which allows the state to unify a massively diverse population under this single, proud identity of children of the dragon.
And that provides a deep mythological reservoir for national identity that feels, timeless and unassailable.
And it's not just some relic of history. This is actively deployed in high-level statecraft today.
It's a living strategy.
It is. The researcher points to that highly visible political moment when President Trump visited Beijing.
And President Xi Jinping used the phrase.
He did. He used that exact phrase, children of the dragon, in a high-stakes diplomatic setting. And that single phrase, rooted in this deep myth, it carries immediate political weight and nationalist fervor.
I remember it sparked some criticism domestically, too.
It did, because it's inherently nationalistic and exclusive, reinforcing this idea that a shared ancestry is the most important thing. The strategic goal of the mythostrategy here is explicit. Chinese political circles aggressively promote Huangdi as the shared ancestor of all ethnic groups in China.
The logic becomes inescapable then.
It does. If you share the ancestor, you must share the territory and the state. It is an incredibly powerful ideological tool for ensuring national and territorial integrity by by spiritual means.
This all sounds so seamless, though, a natural, unifying myth. But the deception at the heart of the strategy is that research suggests Huangdi wasn't actually ethnically Han Chinese. He was appropriated.
This is the historical linchpin of the whole strategy. Its success relies on masking his non-Han origins.
So where do the Chinese historical sources themselves say he was born?
Crucially, they place his birth in the Tianshui region of Gansu province. That's far to the northwest of the traditional central Han heartland.
And Gansu is the geographic gateway to the western regions. It's strategically vital.
And the people who lived there were distinctly different. The historian Enver Bachar notes that the Yandi and Huangdi tribes originated from the nomadic animal-rearing Kang peoples.
So pastoralist societies, not settled agriculturalists.
Exactly. They were operating in the upper reaches of the Yellow River. They later migrated into the middle reaches around Gansu and Shaanxi. And look, this isn't some fringe theory from outside researchers.
Chinese scholars confirm this.
They do. Scholars like Gu Deming confirm this lineage. He noted that Yandi and Huangdi were two distinct ancient peoples. The Yandi were a tribe from the Batur region who migrated from the northwest. The Huangdi tribe settled squarely in the northwest.
A region that was historically home to Huns, Turks, and Tibetans.
A dynamic, multi-ethnic zone. So the critical question becomes, if Huangdi belonged to a northwestern tribe, which potentially included significant Turkic elements, how did he become the definitive, unifying ancestor of the Han Chinese?
This is the mechanism of mythostrategy we have to dissect.
It required a structured, systematic, and centuries-long political re-engineering of the myth. It followed the concept, part of our strategy formula, to a T.
And the sources break this process down into three very distinct observable stages.
Yes. Stage 1, appropriation of origin. This is the extraction of the raw spiritual power. Chinese researchers themselves acknowledge that the core myths about Huangdi originated among the populace of the Northwest, the minority groups.
They were spread orally.
Orally, yes. They had this intrinsic authenticity and power because they were genuine, lived ancestral stories for those people.
So the political power didn't create the myth, it seized it.
It seized it. And that brings us to stage 2, deification and centralization. This stage happened during these crucial periods of state formation and consolidation. The Warring States, the Qin dynasty, and the Han dynasty.
This is when the Han literary and political elite recognized the myth's power.
They did. And they began transcribing it, modifying it, and centralizing the narratives. But they didn't just write it down.
No, they completely rearranged the mythological universe around him.
They absolutely did. Huangdi wasn't just accepted, he was radically elevated. He was deified and placed at the absolute center of the Chinese pantheon. He was put above other respected figures like Nua or Fuxi, who were often associated with local or non-Han origins.
He became the undisputed top of the spiritual pyramid.
And crucially, the location of his spiritual authority was politically mapped onto the target territory.
The location is everything.
It is. Gu Deming confirms that Huangdi's divine residence is on Kunlun Mountain. This mountain range spans the entirety of East Turkestan and Tibet. Kunlun is established in Chinese mythology as the sacred mountain where the gods live, with 12 jade palaces.
So by placing their chief centralized god on Kunlun,
they anchored their ultimate spiritual authority directly into the most strategic and contested territory in the Northwest.
And that leads to stage 3, historical and political integration. This is the final step, where the centralized myth is converted into indisputable political history.
The mythological god was deliberately and systematically treated as a real historical figure by foundational historians, most famously Sima Qian during the Han dynasty.
He was given a genealogy, a timeline.
Concrete achievements. He was embedded into the political lineage of the state itself. And the goal was to ensure that the founders of all subsequent political systems, no matter their actual ethnic background, were politically linked to the lineage of Huangdi and Yandi.
So even the great nomadic dynasties founded by the Huns, Turks, and Mongols in North China.
Yes, dynasties like the early Yan, the late Yan, and the Northern Wei, they were retroactively or politically required to trace their legitimacy back to this Han-appropriated ancestor.
So a Turkic leader could establish a state, but the structure of mythostrategy would require him to spiritually defer to Huangdi as the source of his right to rule.
It creates an inescapable, unified narrative. The strategic result is the use of borrowed, re-engineered myths of other peoples to achieve total political and cultural unity under the banner of a single central ancestor.
Okay, so if Huangdi provides the common father figure and the central political legitimacy, our second case study, Shuangmu, establishes the mother figure and the emotional, aspirational draw of the territory itself.
Right. Shuangmu, the Queen Mother of the West. She's one of the most ancient and respected goddesses in Chinese mythology. Sometimes she's even called the Mother of the Huaxia, the foundational Chinese ethnic group.
And her visual descriptions are fascinating because they immediately suggest non-Han roots, don't they?
They do. She's often depicted as semi-human and semi-animal. Most notably, she has a tiger head on a human body.
That's a powerful image.
It's a very powerful, very wild image. It highlights her origins in ancient tribal totemism. It suggests this deep connection to nature in the mountains.
And politically, she was irresistible to the ruling class. Why?
Because of what she possessed, the elixir of immortality. Because she was the keeper of this substance, emperors and kings desperately sought her favor, hoping to achieve eternal life.
So she was incredibly prestigious, spiritually.
Immensely so. And various philosophical systems, especially Taoism, readily incorporated her as a central, stabilizing figure to enhance their own ideological spread.
And just as with Huangdi, when you dig into her origins, you find this strategic appropriation of a foreign deity.
Yes, research points clearly to Shuangmu being a non-Chinese figure. She's believed to originate with the Qiang and Wuran tribes of the western regions.
And the tiger head.
That stems directly from these tribal groups who used the tiger as a primary sacred totem.
So both the symbolic father, Huangdi, and the symbolic mother, Shuangmu, originate from the exact same strategically vital non-Han territory.
And they share the same spiritual address, Kunlun Mountain. The sources stress this geographical redundancy. Her dwelling place is also cited as Kunlun Mountain, that sacred range spanning East Turkestan and Tibet. This concentration of powerful myths in the contested West, it's not a coincidence.
It's mythological mapping.
That's a perfect way to put it. And this cultural bridge across the Himalayas, it links her directly to Turkic identity.
How so?
Well, Uyghur scholars like Uçkunk and Omer have explored this connection. They identify Shuangmu with the Turkish and Uyghur mythological figure, Ana.
Ana, the ancient goddess of fertility and child protection in Turkic mythology.
The very same. This connection suggests that the powerful figure the Chinese appropriated already held a deep native cultural power in the Western regions.
And this myth is then leveraged to provide a kind of historical justification for Chinese dominion over the West.
It is. The sources cite these mythicized historical accounts of interaction. For instance, there are accounts of King Zhu from the 10th century BCE, who supposedly traveled all the way to the Western regions.
And the myth says he rested at Yaoji Lake,
which some people today identify as Tianqi Lake near Urumqi in East Turkestan. And there he encounters Umayana.
And she's presented as this powerful local leader.
Yes, as a charismatic and highly respected leader of the largest tribal union in the region, noted for her political skill and her expertise in governance. So the Chinese records even acknowledge this local power structure.
But the narrative quickly pivots to political symbolism, doesn't it?
It does. The myth is structured so that Shengmo, or Umayana, is continuously sending goodwill gestures, specifically maps and green jade gifts, to the Chinese emperors.
These aren't just polite neighborly acts.
Not at all. The sources emphasize these are profound, politically symbolic gestures. They're aimed at establishing a historical narrative of submission. They reinforce the idea that the power in the West acknowledges the authority of the central kingdom.
So you have the Yellow Emperor and the Queen Mother, both sitting on Kunlun Mountain, guarded by the ultimate prize, immortality.
And this is the genius of the Mythostrategy. By placing these two foundational ancestors on Kunlun Mountain in the Karakoram range, they transformed the contested western regions into a utopian homeland, a canonical territory.
It becomes this ultimate aspirational destination.
Exactly. It becomes what the Turks historically referred to as the Red Apple, or Kızıl Elma.
The Kızıl Elma. That's a powerful cultural concept in Turkic history. It represents the ultimate goal, the symbol of conquest or an idealized destination.
By linking Shuangmu's elixir of immortality to Kunlun, the Chinese effectively created their own red apple. It became a mythic justification for permanent westward expansion. They instilled the idea that the greatest prize an emperor could ever seek immortality was located there, thus justifying their centuries-long interest in and eventual occupation of the western regions.
So the myth transformed a strategic geographical objective into a spiritual necessity. Okay, so we've seen how Mythostrategy uses deep ancestry with Huangdi and utopian territorial goals with Xiongmu. The third case study feels even more cynical. It's about manufacturing historical reality from a work of pure fiction.
Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. He is perhaps the most famous character in Chinese literature around the world.
A literary hero, half man, half monkey, from the Ming Dynasty novel Journey to the West.
Written by PowerÇin'in in the 16th century, he's this complex, dynamic figure known for his 72 transformations, his immense strength, his rebellion against the celestial order.
He's pure mythology.
Pure mythology. And eventually he accompanies the Buddhist monk Tang Xuanzang on his pilgrimage. And this journey is the key. The historical monk, Xuanzang, traveled in the 7th century to India to get Buddhist scriptures.
But the fictional journey, written 1,000 years later,
takes them through the Western regions in Central Asia.
And this purely fictional journey is now being weaponized by the Chinese government.
Absolutely. The modern application of Mythostrategy uses this character to actively create the perception that the Western regions have always been intrinsically Chinese territory.
Because a historical Chinese hero supposedly traveled and lived there.
That's the narrative. It's post hoc justification through fabricated cultural history. And the acts of propaganda are bold and physical.
Like what? What are the specific acts?
Well, first, statues of the Monkey King, this fictional hero, have been erected all over East Turkestan in strategic spots like Turfan. They're literally placing the fictional character right into the landscape.
But they go further than just public art. They try to provide archaeological evidence.
They do. The sources cite this notorious example from the People's Daily newspaper on October 9, 2003.
A major state-run newspaper.
The biggest. And they published a news story claiming that a three-dimensional sculpture resembling Sun Wukong was discovered on Turfan's Yelkan Mountain.
And by using the language of discovery and resembling, they're trying to imply historical authenticity.
The implied mythostrategy is crystal clear. Sun Wukong, the literary character, was a real historical resident of this territory. Therefore, this region has an ancient, permanent connection to the Central Kingdom's foundational narrative.
It's an effort to depict a mythological hero who can fly and do 72 transformations as someone who left behind tangible, historical evidence on the very land China currently occupies.
It's the perfect modern demonstration of mythostrategy, manufacturing consent and legitimacy through culturally resonant fiction.
We've established that the strategic borrowing, processing, and deploying of non-Han myths is central to Chinese expansionism and assimilation. But this core mechanism, linking legitimacy to ancestry, it has to be universal, right?
Oh, it is. The strategic use of myth for political legitimacy is not unique to China. Any established civilization needs a powerful origin story to justify rule.
But the Chinese execution seems unique.
The execution for mass assimilation and territorial control is unparalleled in its systematic nature. But the basic principle is universal.
So how do we see this legitimacy function used within the Turkic tradition?
It's evident throughout history. The great Turkic political entities, the Gökturks, the Uyghur Khans, the Karahanids, the Seljuks, they all leveraged myth. They trace their lineages back to the mythical ancestor Afrasiab.
Afrasiab, the heroic king from the Iranian epic, the Shahnameh. So that connection provided instant transnational cultural weight.
It was crucial. Political acceptance wasn't just granted by military success. A ruler needed to be linked to a powerful, undisputed mythical ancestor to gain the necessary public legitimacy.
And the prime example the sources cite is Seljuk Bey, the founder of the powerful Seljuk state.
It's an excellent illustration of the strategy formula in action. Seljuk Bey's father was a humble tent maker named Dukak. Seljuk himself was an exceptional military leader. He defeated Mahmud of Ghazni, but he was not of royal or noble blood.
Which, in a society founded on ancient hierarchies, would be completely unacceptable. His power was raw, but his legitimacy was zero.
Exactly. He had the power component, but he needed the concept, the mythic link, to validate his goal. According to the historical sources, specifically the Beşeri Tarikhim, Seljuk Bey deployed mythostrategy.
And what did he claim?
He fabricated a connection. He asserted that he was descended from Afrasiab after 35 generations. He claimed that Afrasiab's descendants had settled among the Kinnik tribe, which allowed Seljuk to then assert himself as the rightful heir and ruler.
And that instantly created legitimacy where none existed before.
Using the immense spiritual power of a shared cultural ancestor. It proves that mythostrategy is a universal political necessity. Whether in China or the Turkic world, rulers must link their temporal power to an eternal, mythological, and undisputed source of origin.
So let's bring it back to the Chinese application. The centuries-long systematic commitment to mythostrategy, especially the successful imposition of Di as the first ancestor of all peoples, created this massive, unstoppable political force.
And the outcome was what you could call the spiritual subordination of this vast array of ethnic groups. Because ancestor worship and filial piety are such deeply embedded cultural concepts, once the myth was established, the different ethnic groups became spiritually subject to the central kingdom. This obedience came not just from military occupation, but from respect and loyalty to the manufactured shared ancestor.
They internalized the rule, which makes the power much harder to challenge.
And this successful method of assimilation, built on that initial appropriation and re-engineering, has had a profound demographic consequence. The Chinese population has grown exponentially. The source describes it as growing like a snowball over history,
leading to the current population of 1.5 billion people.
And maintaining the largest, most unified multi-ethnic state in history. That's a critical conclusion. Mythostrategy isn't just about legitimacy. It's fundamentally linked to the successful consolidation and growth of a massive population base under a singular enforced identity.
And finally, it seems the psychological leverage of myth is just too valuable to be confined to politics.
Not at all. Mythostrategy has been fully adopted by the commercial world.
The goal is the same, isn't it? Use a compelling archetypal concept power, victory, speed, to direct the audience toward a specific goal. In this case, buying something.
The strategy is simple but brilliant. You associate your product with a mythological figure or concept that already holds deep positive cultural memory, and you instantly borrow that spiritual power.
And you see examples everywhere. Once you start looking for it, it's impossible to ignore.
Think about the biggest brands. Nike, named after the Greek goddess of victory, it immediately imparts a feeling of athletic triumph.
Bellona, the Roman goddess of war, used to market strong, durable furniture.
Volvo, even though it means eye roll in Latin, it conjures up these images of ancient Roman engineering and strength. Pegasus, the winged horse, suggests speed and freedom in travel.
And just using the name armor doesn't just describe the product's protection. It connects the consumer to the ancient archetype of the warrior and the defender.
Exactly. This widespread, successful deployment of commercial mythostrategy, from shoes to cars, it confirms that the underlying principles we've discussed hold true across all fields. Leveraging archetypal meaning and deep cultural memory is the most effective tool for control, direction, and ultimately profit.
So this deep dive into mythostrategy really reveals that the systematic use of myth is a core mechanism of state power. The deliberate re-engineering of narratives, as we've seen in the stories of Di, Xu Huangmu, and Sun Wukong, has been used consistently for political, territorial, and assimilation purposes for centuries.
To reiterate our key findings, first we saw that China strategically borrowed, processed, and utilized the foundational myths of other, often subjugated groups, and they used them to create a powerful, unified mythological universe that ultimately served only the Central Kingdom's political agenda.
Second, by elevating Di as the shared ancestor, the central government achieved this profound spiritual subordination of vast, disparate populations. And this was achieved not by physical coercion alone, but by leveraging the unbreakable cultural concepts of ancestor worship and filial piety.
Third, the placement of the Yellow Emperor and the Queen Mother on Kunlun Mountain, tied to the myth of the elixir of immortality, mythologically mapped the western regions. This transformed the Karakoram range into an aspirational territorial objective, the Kazal Elma, thereby justifying historic interest and the later occupation of strategic lands like East Turkestan.
And finally, this is not just history. That original link between the dragon and Di is still actively deployed in modern political and cultural circles today to continually construct and reinforce national identity, demonstrating that mythostrategy is a living, adaptive tool of power.
So considering the proven effectiveness of mythostrategy, how this manufactured shared ancestry can unify vast and disparate populations under a single political center, shaping territory and even modern commerce, we have to ask you, the listener, to turn this lens inward.
What core myths or deep cultural stories are shaping your own collective consciousness today, and for whose ultimate strategic benefit? We'd encourage you to look beyond the immediate headlines and examine the foundational narratives, the mythologies that inform modern media, social narratives, or even the brands you interact with, and question the strategic goals behind them. Who is the modern-day Di, and what territory are they claiming?
That is the deep dive. We'll see you next time.